let's pivot into something else that I want to talk about here, and that's bigs in the NBA. And to get us into that, I have a pop quiz question for you, Seerat.
There's a quiz?
A quiz, yes, a pop quiz.
I hate tests.
Okay, all right. Let's put
Why did I do a podcast called University?
So let's put 10 seconds on the clock.
Okay. Oh, good. That's lots of time.
Over a 6-year stretch from the 09-10 season through the 14-15 season, how many different players listed as 6'11" or taller averaged at least 3.5 assists?
Until 15.
09-10 through
6'11" and
14-15.
higher.
We need an answer, Seerat.
0, probably, honestly.
0. The answer is 3. Joakim Noah and Marc Gasol did it 3 times. Paul Gasol did it twice.
Could be one of those. Again, we're not supposed to talk about Marc Gasol.
We're not supposed to talk about
Kevin.
him.
Come on.
But the reason why I mentioned that is because in the 6 years since then, from 15-16 through this current season so far, 12 have done it. We have some guys doing it this season for at least the second time. Giannis, Jokic, Simmons, Sabonis, and Towns. And then you have others who have done it at least once. Vucevic, Nurkic, Embiid, Mason Plumlee. Noah did it. And of course, Pau and Marc Gasol are the others. And that doesn't even factor in some of the shorter centers in the league today, like Bam Adebayo. Point being, people spent a couple of years there saying the big man is a dead position. Gasol felt like a relic of a past era, but what he really was a sign of what was to come with more bigs who can make plays from the perimeter. We have so many bigs right now who are passers, who are perimeter scorers, who bring the floor up, who bring the ball up the court, who are two-way guys. And that's made for a league that has so much variety. And when you were on The Answer with Chris Ryan a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation too. You phrased it basketball diversity. With all these different styles. Can you explain what you mean by that basketball diversity?
Well, I like the idea of the fact that, you know, a guy like Schroeder can exist on the court with a guy like Anthony Davis, that we haven't gotten to this place with basketball that, you know, everyone's a 6'7" defender / shooter, 3-and-D guy, at least out of the role players. But I think what we're seeing in the NBA is just a lot of skill reappropriation. Like, the game is obviously changing a lot, but I think that the mistake that was made earlier was like the idea that, okay, now that the game is changing, certain players are just going to go extinct. And obviously for some guys that happened to be the case, like some guys that were really like already who they were, like Roy Hibbert, I think is the most famous example of somebody who went from being one of the most valuable players in the league to basically being unplayable in a few years. But for the most part, like, you can adjust. And I think that is like something that we lose sight of sometimes when things change. In the NBA, things change all the time, but there's also an off season. And like, it's not like we're the only people seeing that things are changing. Like, these players that want to stay in the league are like, oh, damn, like what I was doing last year isn't quite as valuable, or like maybe I need to extend my range. One of the most interesting things to me has been the fact that big men have been able to extend their range. That was something that wasn't even supposed to happen. It was like, oh, the geometry doesn't work because they're too tall or their hands are too big. And it's like, no, you got to just try the thing. Not everyone's going to be able to do it, but if you think that it's because of your body, then it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, big men are now taking small guy skills, and also like guards are posting up more. Like, the league has become
setting screens too, standing in the dunker spot. You're having small guys do that. It's wild.
Yeah. Like, guys, and like especially small guys that can't shoot as well, like guys that need to cut more. Like, you know, Eric Bledsoe comes to example as a guy who's kind of like within the Pelican system. Like, if he doesn't cut at the exact right moment, things don't really necessarily work out for them. But he is somebody who can do that. Like, it's enough to keep him on the floor. He's like a bigger guy as well. So, you know, it's just, to me, I think I like seeing that. I love seeing players do new things, find new wrinkles in the game, and B, just because somebody isn't a particular size doesn't mean that you need to write them off. And I'm sure this is like, Kevin, as you cover the draft, I'm sure this is something you think about all the time. Just like, how much are you supposed to focus on dimensions versus how much are you supposed to think about things that you don't really figure out until later. Like, one of the things I realized reporting the Draymond piece was that, you know, we talked a lot about intelligence with a lot of these guys. Like, they are able to process enough information to be able to switch, which means that they have to know the tendencies of all 5 positions, for example. That's not something that you used to have to be able to do. So you have to be really smart in the modern NBA. Like you have to, like, we see these things like Draymond calls out plays, or LeBron has photographic memory. Like, well, if you want to be an elite defensive player, that's almost a necessity, especially if you're undersized, especially if you have to like anticipate and be in places before other people are, right? Like that is something that you have to be able to do. But the thing is, like, you don't know who's that smart until they get on your team. That is the one thing that every single coach, every single scout said about every single one of the guys that I talked about. And you hear it with, like, for example, you heard it about Rondo anytime he got to a new place. Obviously, LeBron. There are so many things that you just can't know. And a lot of that is just like what's in between your head, and like what's your mindset, and are you going to be able to improve upon certain skills? Like what's your hand eye, like what's your motor, like how quickly can you improve? Like, will you
all
go
these
into train something
intangible
one
skills,
day?
right? Just all intangible stuff.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Like all this stuff is like, we're starting to measure it, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So I think at this point, like your dimensions and your athleticism are still a little bit overvalued.
So who were some of those other players in your article for the listeners who may not have read it yet? And we should put the link to it in the description of the podcast as well.
Oh yeah, you should totally put the link to it in the description of the podcast. I think that would be wonderful.
Get you some clicks.
Yeah,
I know Xavier Tillman was in there, right?
Xavier Tillman was in there. Your boy, Lou Dort, your boy, Draymond Green. We should just like collaborate for this article.
Clearly, I have a type of basketball player.
Yeah. As do I. Draymond Green was like the inspiration for it. I was thinking about players that were able to find a place in the NBA because of him. And the article came to be because I was watching the Rockets play the Thunder in the bubble. And there was this moment where Steven Adams, a couple possessions in a row, couldn't close out on PJ Tucker. And PJ Tucker was doing just fine on him in the other end. Like, you're not really going to post up Steven Adams. Like, as long as, you're positioning yourself well in the pick and roll, like, he's athletic and he's big, but you're not going to like throw it way above PJ Tucker. Like, it's not the Lakers where you can just go lob sitting on a team like that, right? So they had to take him out of the game. And they took him out of the game for Lou Dort. Now, all of a sudden, Lou Dort is 6'4" guy playing center. And for Steven Adams, it's like, you would think he'd be happy, like, oh, the Warriors aren't in the playoffs this year. Like, I'm home free, right? And it's like, no, man, like, the league has changed. Like, you have somebody squeezing you out on both ends. Like, you have your own teammate that can play your position, and you have PJ Tucker on the other end, 6'5" center. And when the Rockets made that trade in last February, everybody was like, oh my God, this is so revolutionary, which it was. But then it gets pushed on immediately because the team needs to adjust to it. And to me, that evolution like really started with Draymond, because that was like the first, like when the Warriors did that, it was like, oh, you can switch and screen and just be fine and have this playmaker who's really skilled and, reappropriate a lot of center skills. Like, I think reappropriation is just like the theme of the NBA right now. Like, can you get guys to, like, can you do something that your team doesn't have necessarily is pretty much like one of the bigger questions in the NBA.
To your point, it's sort of like the shape and size of the player doesn't really matter all too much right now. You can be big and be a so-called point guard. You can be small and set screens and stand in the dunker spot like we talked about earlier. And, you mentioned earlier the idea of in the past, it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for a lot of these big players. You're big, so be near the rim. Don't handle the ball. Don't shoot. I feel like, with the drafts, for players who are currently in the league while this shift happened, it just took a little bit of time for those guys to adjust. A Brook Lopez, a Marc Gasol, or even like someone like a Dwayne Dedmon adding a 3-pointer to their team, even though he's a free agent right now. And for younger players, those younger guys, I think they just grew up doing that. They grew up practicing those skills. And that's why we're seeing a complete tidal wave of them entering the league. I mean, there's so many young guys. Like, we didn't even mention a Jaren Jackson Jr. on the Grizzlies who hasn't played.
Like that.
Yeah, he was ready-made as a knockdown shooter, coming off screens and handoffs. We have all these guys that are big that have so-called small skills. And I feel like that I don't know if there's any going back from where the league is right now. I don't think this is just a wave of skilled bigs, still skilled big players. I think this is just the way the game is going to be moving forward.